Be honest with me for a second. When you think of someone who is just a brilliant critical thinker, do you picture them as having some kind of innate genetic superpower, like they were just born that way? Or do you see critical thinking as a concrete, step-by-step skill that absolutely anyone can be taught? It's a genuinely fascinating question, and honestly, the answer has massive implications for how we learn, how we teach, and how we navigate a world that is just completely overflowing with information.
Welcome to The Explainer. I am so excited you're here with us today. Our mission right now is to completely dismantle some of the biggest, most persistent myths around how human beings actually learn to think. We're going to look at the hard cognitive science behind why some people can effortlessly slice through complex problems, while the rest of us sometimes just get completely stuck.
So here's our roadmap for today. We'll start by defining critical thinking, bust the general transfer myth, explore surface versus deep structure, reveal the sheer power of knowledge, and finally, we'll look at a practical 4-step teaching plan.
Okay, let's dive into this. Section 1. Defining critical thinking. What does it actually mean? To guide us through all of this, we are drawing directly from a really brilliant paper commissioned by the New South Wales Department of Education. It was authored by Daniel T. Willingham. Now, if you don't know him, he's a prominent cognitive psychologist who focuses almost entirely on the application of cognitive psychology to education. Basically, he's done the rigorous research to figure out what actually works in the human brain.
Willingham offers a highly practical, common-sense view of critical thinking, boiling the whole thing down to 3 specific criteria. First up, your thinking has to be novel, meaning you aren't just pulling a memorized solution out of your brain. Second, it's got to be self-directed. You aren't just following a recipe or blindly doing what someone else told you to do. And third, and this is absolutely crucial for our purposes today, it must be effective. You have to respect certain conventions that actually yield useful conclusions. Things like offering actual evidence for your claims or not letting your emotions completely override your reason. We are entirely focused on successful, effective thinking here.
Moving right along. Section 2. The general transfer myth. Can brain training actually make you smarter?
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the sheer contrast between what we want to believe and what is actually true. For over a century, people have deeply believed in formal discipline. That's the myth that studying difficult content, like say Latin, geometry, or computer coding, acts like a workout for your brain, training your willpower and logical focus, making you a better thinker in literally all other areas of life. But reality is governed by what's called domain specificity. Science shows us that critical thinking skills are largely encapsulated. So the analytical skills you learn in a history class, they mostly stay in the history class. They do not automatically make you better at evaluating a complex scientific claim.
And cognitive science has proven this over and over again. General transfer has just failed repeatedly in rigorous studies. Way back in the early 1900s, psychologist Edward Thorndike actually proved that practicing geometry didn't make students any better at estimating other shapes. Later on, big calls for kids to learn computer programming to boost general intelligence totally fell flat. Teaching kids to play chess doesn't magically skyrocket their math scores, and simply listening to classical music, the famous Mozart effect, doesn't somehow turn babies into little geniuses. It's a bummer, I know, but all-purpose intelligence enhancers simply do not work the way we wish they did.
All right, let's look at the why. Section 3, surface versus deep structure, the mechanics of thought.
Take a look at this classic, honestly fascinating experiment by researchers Gick and Holyoake. They gave test subjects a medical problem, okay? A patient has a tumor. You have a ray that can destroy it, but at full strength, that ray is going to destroy all the healthy tissue on the way in. So how do you solve it? Well, almost no one could figure it out. Then, other subjects read a military story about a dictator inside a fortress. The roads to the fortress were heavily mined to blow up large armies, but small groups could pass right over them safely. The solution there, disperse the rebel forces down different roads and just have them converge on the fortress at the exact same time. Now, here is the amazing thing. Even after reading the military story just moments before, subjects completely failed to apply that exact same logic to the medical problem.
So why did they fail? It all comes down to how our brains actually process problems. Human brains naturally fixate on surface structure, those explicit, obvious details. Doctors, rays, and tumors feel entirely different to us than rebels, landmines, and fortresses. And because we get completely stuck on the surface, we miss the deep structure, the abstract functional relationship underneath it all. In both of those scenarios, the deep structure is literally identical. Distribute your forces to avoid collateral damage and converge at the point of attack. Unless we are explicitly prompted, human beings are incredibly bad at seeing the deep structure when the surface details change.
Which brings us to the big solution. Section 4. The power of knowledge. The secret ingredient to thinking. Let's do a quick thought experiment together. Seriously, try this with me. I want you to mentally answer this question. How is a scarecrow like a blueberry? Think about it. Right now, your working memory, which is the mental workspace where you hold and manipulate information, is busy retrieving facts. Scarecrows are in fields, they protect crops, they aren't alive. Blueberries are purple, small, used in pies. You're actively cross-referencing all these features, looking for an overlap. It takes a little bit of mental effort, right?
Now, what if I ask you what a blueberry, a scarecrow, a flower pot, a drumstick, and a dishwasher all have in common? Suddenly, your working memory just hits a brick wall. It is completely overwhelmed. You might have the mental space to remember those 5 words, but you definitely don't have the mental RAM left over to pull up the background details of all 5 items and compare them simultaneously. Your working memory, as it turns out, is incredibly limited.
So how do expert thinkers overcome this huge limitation? Simple, through background knowledge. Deep domain knowledge allows experts to do something really cool called clumping. Think of a chess grandmaster looking at a board. They don't see 32 individual pieces that they have to process one by one. Their extensive knowledge allows them to see a specific defensive formation as just one single meaningful unit. By clumping information together like that, they free up massive amounts of working memory, which they can then use to actually strategize and outthink their opponent.
So the crucial point is this: you cannot think critically about a subject if you don't have deep knowledge about it. As Willingham brilliantly points out, telling a student to look for hidden assumptions in a newspaper op-ed about a foreign war is completely, utterly useless if they don't actually know the history of that war. Writers assume you know the background. If you don't, you aren't critically analyzing the argument. You're just struggling to comprehend the basic sentences on the page.
Let's move to Section 5 and see how this builds into a real plan. Section 5, a 4-step teaching plan, putting science into practice. Willingham lays out this masterful, highly actionable 4-step teaching plan for educators. Step 1, identify critical thinking skills per domain. Don't just say think like a historian, be specific. Teach them how to corroborate historical sources, which is a totally different skill from how a scientist evaluates a lab report. Step 2, identify the specific subject matter content. You have to deliberately choose the background facts students need to learn in order to actually support those specific skills. Step 3, sequence the knowledge and skills logically, so new learning always builds on a solid foundation of existing knowledge. And Step 4, revisit these skills across the years. It takes 3 to 5 years of practice, constantly embedded in new content, for these skills to truly stick long-term.
Of course, pulling this off in the real world requires a few practical considerations. First, it requires serious coordination across entire school systems and grades. A single teacher just can't do it alone in one semester. Second, we have to remember that young children are highly capable. Cognitive science has totally updated old developmental theories. Even very young kids can handle complex reasoning, provided they understand the specific content. Third, and this is critical, we must ensure low-income students have access to this rich, advanced content because they often don't get the same exposure outside of school. Finally, you can't really assess true critical thinking with a multiple-choice test. It requires open-form questions where students actually have to sit down and generate a real argument.
As we wrap up this explainer today, I want to leave you with this incredibly powerful thought straight from the source material. The way the mind works, shallow is what you get first. Deep, critical thinking is hard-won. It is not a generic trick, and it's certainly not a magic superpower. True critical thinking is the hard-won result of combining specific strategies with deep, rich background knowledge. So, if general brain training is a myth and deep understanding is the only real path to critical thought, what specific domain are you going to master next?